This is a second in a series of lessons that I'm giving based on my book, The 12 Freedoms. Last time we talked about how humanity desires to be free. And individually, we all desire to have more freedom in our life. Freedom financially, freedom in terms of our health, in every area of life. And it's natural to our being to want this. And I said that the way to do that is to begin by understanding you're not just a physical being, you're a mind being. And then I suggested for us to be able to work well as mind beings. We all know how we can work well physically. That is, we need to eat right, we need to exercise and take care of the body. But not everyone understands how they need to work well as a mind being. And so I suggested last week that there are 12 faculties of mind that we need to understand and to learn how to develop and use them well in our lives. This is perhaps a new thought for many of you, as it was to me. And I last week again said the first time I heard this, I was studying the Old Testament with Charles Fillmore, the great metaphysician, who said the Bible stories were allegories, and that if you understood the story of Jacob and the 12 sons, you'd understand it really was metaphysically trying to tell us that there are 12 faculties of mind. Well, again, if you just turned in this time, just stay with me again. When you say, wait a minute, that Bible story is about 12 faculties of mind? Let me approach it in a different way for today's sharing. When you and I ideate anything in life, whether we realize it or not, it always, in its fulfillment, has to have what I call attendant ideas to go with it. For instance, if you were one of the early primitives and thought, you know, it would be nice to be able to sit down off the ground. I'm tired of sitting on the ground. I want to be able to sit off the ground. And so you're going to make something that you can take any place you go and be able to sit off the ground. We call that a chair. And what we don't often think of is it can't be a chair unless it has a certain number of attendant ideas to make it a chair. A chair, again, is something that allows you to sit off the ground. But it has to have the attendant idea of strength. Because if it isn't strong, you sit down and it'll collapse. It has to have the idea of form. It has to have the right form for you to be able to sit on it. If it's a little spike, obviously you're not going to be able to sit on it. And so it has strength, and it has form, and it has portability. If it's chair, it has to be able to be taken around wherever you go or wish it to be. And so you understand that. A chair is an idea of ability to sit off the ground, but it has 3 attendant ideas that go with it. Did you realize that there isn't anything that you could tell me that you think about that doesn't have attendant ideas with it? An automobile has numerous attendant ideas that go with it. Just to mention a few, it obviously has strength. It has to hold together. It obviously has a degree of comfort, or you wouldn't want to sit in it. And somebody who works in that business could probably come up with 30 or 40 attendant ideas that have to be there or they're not a car. Anything you can mention in life has to have attendant ideas for it to be workable. And so when I advanced the thought in our last sharing that there are 12 faculties of mind, what I'm really saying is that you as a mind being have 12 attendant ideas that make it possible for you to be what you were created to be. And now I have to move us a little bit further in this understanding to say that somebody has to be the originator of the idea that calls for the 12 attendant faculties or 12 attendant ideas. And from a metaphysical standpoint, we have said that we are an idea in the mind of God, or the creative intelligence of the universe. Each one of us is patterned after the idea that God holds in mind for us. And so what I am saying, following that philosophy, is that when God ideated us, He created 12 attendant ideas that are present in each of us as mind beings that we are, that God created us to be. Again, if you're staying with me and you're thinking, well, I don't know, that sounds like a way out idea again, because some of our metaphysical ideas, when they're first heard, sound that way. But on the other hand, when you read the work of one of the great scientists of today, a fellow named Davies, who is a physicist in Australia, Dr. Davies has written a book and has suggested the very thing, same thing, that each of us exists in the mind of God. Buckminster Fuller, who I often quote because he's probably the most brilliant man of the last century, and that would include people like Einstein when I say that. Bucky Fuller said the same thing, that we are in the mind of God. And so, metaphysicians who have said this for many years are not, in quotes, way out. It's just science is catching up with us to realize there is a creative intelligence in the universe, and it has given life to all of us as an idea in its mind, and that idea has 12 attendant ideas. And as, again, I said last week, we arrived at, there were 12 because we believed that we were given this insight in our allegorical stories in the Old Testament, and that Jesus confirmed by choosing 12 disciples. Well, again, I don't want to suppose that you're second-guessing everything I say, but again, when I heard that there were 12 faculties of mind being given to us in these stories, I thought, well, how could they have been so bright, whoever wrote those allegorical stories that were written at least 1,600 years before they appeared in the Bible? How could they have been so bright that they could have known about God mind and that it had 12 faculties and weave that into a story that would be kept alive because it was so romantic and exciting as the story of Jacob and the 12 sons was? How could they have done that? Well, I came across the work of another great thinker, a psychologist, by the name of Julian Jaynes. Jaynes was a professor at Princeton University, and he wrote a wonderful book about the bicameral mind, the consciousness and the breakdown of the bicameral mind. And the book was a challenge to the science of today and many of his associates in the field of psychology, but at the same time, it is so powerful that it is still very much alive today. It had many publications and many study groups around the world still working with his ideas, because this is what Dr. Jaynes said. He said that up until approximately 3000 BC, the human being did not function with a reflective consciousness at all. He said they functioned from what he called a bicameral mind, and that the right side of the mind spoke to the left side of the brain, that the left side of the brain actually heard like a voice, and that it functioned from that voice. And he offered us examples of this, and in a sense a proof of it, when he said, when you look at a writing like the Iliad, that so many of us studied when we were in school, this great piece of literature, he said, you'll find that there's nothing in it that indicates that the writer had any sense of reflective characters at all. They were all like beings that functioned from the voice, which was often interpreted to be a God that was speaking to them. And Dr. James also said, this is true of the Old Testament as well. And that's when all my buttons went on, my lights lit up. I said, yeah, that's how we got the stories of the Old Testament. They're so magnificent as allegories that, and now I'm with that story that I say James is supporting what I believe. But James felt that the voice that spoke was merely a voice that came from the experience that the right side of the brain had in its daily living. But I found myself realizing, no, I think the voice that they heard when they were the authors of the books like the Iliad in the Old Testament was the voice of creative intelligence. This, as I affirmed last week, this universal intelligence that knows each of us and can speak to us and direct us. I don't hear voices, but my dear wife of many years often would hear a voice, and it was often very, very right on. And so I'm suggesting that the voice that spoke through the author of the Iliad and of the Old Testament was the voice of universal intelligence that was wanting this message to be kept alive for us until we came of an age when we could understand what it had to tell us. And what I'm saying once again is, it was trying to tell us we're mind beings with 12 incredible faculties of mind. Last time we talked about Joseph as imagination, a fabulous faculty of mind. And then we talked about his brother Benjamin representing faith, which is a wonderful faculty of mind. And so, as we discuss these 12 faculties as we go on in our lessons, you will appreciate how important each one of them is and how they are all related to each other. I want to tell you about another confirmation I had, because in the beginning, as I said, I was somewhat of a doubter of this whole theory. And it meant a really great deal to me when I came across the work of Buckminster Fuller, who I mention from time to time, this great thinker of the past century. But Bucky wrote two fantastic books that were sort of the gathering of all of his work of his lifetime, called Synergetics and Synergetics 2. And these books are primarily all about geometry. They are incredible work that supported all the work he did in the creation of the geodesic domes that he built around the world. There's something like 300,000 of them in the world today. But in between all of his work in the field of geometry is this wonderful metaphysical insights that he had. You know, he said that for every principle that is a physical principle of life, there's a metaphysical component for it. And so I began to study what he had to say about his metaphysical insights. And one of the things that he said that immediately caught my attention is that the basic building block of the physical universe is the tetrahedron. The basic building block of the universe is the tetrahedron. That is, you can mash everything down physically to the smallest form that could be left. It would be a tetrahedron, which is a four-sided triangle, as probably most of you know. And what he said about that is that there are, of course, 6 vectors of a tetrahedron triangle, and that these 6 vectors are actually 12. I thought, 12? And he said, yes, because there's always an inside and an outside to everything. And he said, the tetrahedron is the only form like this can be pulled inside out. And so he said, you actually have not 6 vectors, but 12. And I love it also that he went on to say that these 12 vectors are actually powerings. They are powerings. And when I first learned about the 12 faculties of mind, it was suggested that they were the 12 powers of mind. And I said, what a synchronicity, a word of support for the whole concept, that here are this basic building block of the universe, which has the 6 vectors, which are actually 12, that are powerings, that give power and direction and freedom to your life if you learn to work with them. And so I thought, you know, something else wonderful about this, that as I studied the 12 faculties of mind, I found that just like faith and imagination that I talked about last time, they come in pairs. And when we share them, I'll reveal them to you as pairs. Faith and imagination are 2 of the pairs, and life and renunciation are another pair. And so I thought, boy, you don't have to take Bucky's concept of the 6 vectors that make 12. You don't have to try hard to make them fit the concept of the 12 faculties, because they come in pairs like that too. One is the passive, one is the active. And that's the way Buckminster Fuller described the vectors. He said one is the passive side, one is the active side. One is the positive side, one is the negative side. Not in terms of being bad, negative in that sense, just more of the electrical, the phase. One is just the other phase of the other. They are coupled together. And so when we discuss them in the future, I will point out that one of them takes the role of being more active, whereas the other plays the role of being more passive. It is always the support for the other. Let's talk about faith and imagination just briefly today, and realize that faith is the active faculty. When you have faith in something, it allows something to happen. But imagination is the passive side of it that's always present, because what you're going to actually bring forth in your life is what you imagine. You can never use your faith to manifest something good in your life that's any different than what you can imagine it could be. You create the parameters through your use of imagination. It's a fantastic coming together in my own mind of realizing how the physical universe is made, to saying this is the way God has made us too. We are these marvelous mind beings with these 12 faculties of mind. As you learn to use each of them, you will appreciate more and more how they impact your life. And beyond that, what I have discovered is that when you understand these faculties, you can begin to understand people better. When you see them doing things, you think, uh-oh, they're using their particular faculty in a way that's causing them to be this way. One last thought for this sharing. Buckminster Fuller said that there are eons of ways that these combinations of these vectors can come together, just like there are eons of ways in which these 12 freedoms can be brought together. And because there are eons of ways that can happen, it accounts for why we have eons of people that are different. There are no 2 people exactly alike in the entire universe. Never have been and never will be. There are that many potential differences for expression through the combination of these 12 wonderful mind faculties. I know you're going to enjoy this study, and I'll look forward to sharing more with you.